The sun filtered softly into the living room that Father's Day afternoon, casting a warm glow over familiar photos and the worn leather furniture where I sat quietly. It was a room heavy with memories, some comforting, others stinging with loss. I watched Sarah and her husband conduct the day's ritual with forced cheer, their smiles' brittle edges hiding something colder beneath. Sarah, my daughter, stepped forward first, offering an extravagant gift to her father-in-law, a watch that gleamed like a small treasure, worth more than I had ever managed to spend on any present. The gratitude on his face was genuine and warm, his surprise reaching his eyes as he admired the timepiece. Sarah's smile, proud and just a little smug, lingered on the moment as if savoring her victory. Then came my turn. She glanced at me briefly, the faintest flicker of disdain crossing her features before she pulled a small, unassuming box from a designer bag. Inside lay socks, plain $15 socks. Cheap, synthetic, utterly out of place amid the glossy celebration. Her voice was sharp when she handed them to me. "I thought you could use these, Dad. Practical, right?" The words snapped through the room, cruel and deliberate, like a quiet jab that bore deeper than any shout could. I felt the heat rise behind my stern mask, my mind reeling in disbelief and hurt. I forced a thin smile, a measured shield against the sudden ache, and pressed the gift to my chest, swallowing the urge to protest. Around us, polite applause hid the true weight of the moment, camouflaging the sting beneath a veneer of civility. Sarah's husband exchanged a sideways glance with a smirk that spoke volumes without words. Their unspoken message was unmistakable. My years of sacrifice, my kindness, all meaningless in their eyes. I lingered on the memory of late nights working overtime, the tuition I paid for Sarah's education, the mortgage that secured our family home. Each sacrifice etched deeply into my heart, now rendered invisible and cheap. The socks were not just a gift, they were a symbol of how far things had fallen. I wanted to shout, to demand respect that was due, but I swallowed the anger and rose with quiet dignity. I would not allow this humiliation to break me in front of them. No harsh words escaped my lips. The room held its breath as I slipped away, closing the door softly behind me. Alone, I let the pain rise briefly in the stillness. Then, beneath it, something colder settled, a resolve. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my generosity for an endless supply. But this moment was a line drawn in invisible ink, a quiet declaration that everything would change. I would not be their victim. I would watch carefully, plan deliberately, and when the time was right, I would make them pay, not with rage, but with the calculated precision of a man well versed in numbers and consequences. Tonight marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Justice would be restored. Arrogance would be punished, but always with control. I held that silent promise close, feeling the weight of it settle in my bones. They had no idea what was coming next. The house took on a different tone after that day. The lively energy seemed to drain away, leaving behind an oppressive quiet that pressed against the walls. I withdrew to my study, a room I'd long used as a fortress of solitude, where shelves bowed under the weight of books, ledgers lay neatly stacked, and the steady ticking of old clocks kept time like a metronome for my thoughts. Sitting in the worn leather chair behind my oak desk, I let my mind drift back through the years, summoning memories of sacrifice that had built the life I had once hoped would bind us together as a family. I saw Sarah as she once was, a curious child with eyes so full of hope and sharp intelligence, dreaming stratospheres beyond what I could have ever envisioned for her. In those earlier years, I gave everything, long days and late nights, countless hours spent working overtime. I paid no heed to fatigue or frustration because each penny I earned was sowed like seed into the future of a child I dearly loved. I could still feel the roughness of old suits and the stiff collar of my tie pressing against a neck worn thin by effort and responsibility. It had all been worth it, or so I thought. One night stood out in sharp relief, the semester when the tuition bill arrived as a towering mountain of debt. I remembered sitting alone, the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating bills and statements, while I counted every dollar like a miser guarding treasure. There was no margin for error. I made calls, arranged sub-accounts, even borrowed against the house itself. The house that had become a second skin of mine, the place built by sweat and years of steady labor. Vacations were an unheard luxury. New clothes were bought sparingly, and every indulgence was postponed to secure a foundation on which my daughter could climb. And yet, when that afternoon arrived, that pitiful gift, the socks, descended like a silent verdict on all those years. The sting wasn't in the price, but in the message. I was no longer deserving of respect, love, or the dignity one offers a parent. The coldness in Sarah's eyes as she handed me those socks was a rejection sharper than any spoken word. It was as if the sacrifices that had fueled her education and given our family stability were now erased by entitlement and impatience. I sank into the weight of that realization. This was not just about material goods, but about the erosion of the fundamental bond between father and daughter. Gifts had once symbolized affection and thoughtfulness. Now they had mutated into calculated slights meant to wound, to underscore a diminished status. I resolved to no longer be their passive victim. Instead, I would observe, assess, and prepare. Years spent mastering financial analysis and strategic planning became tools of a calculated response. My wrath would not be raw nor rash. It would be tempered by reason and executed with precision. Revenge, if it could be called that, would take the form of measured action, not by brute force or confrontation, but by the steady application of knowledge and law. The day's humiliation marked the closing of one chapter, but it also lit the spark of a new beginning. Justice, once an abstract concept, now became a personal creed. Arrogance would be met with its due consequence, without spectacle or drama. There would be control at every turn, the hallmark of each move I would make. As twilight deepened outside, I held that silent promise close. It was a heavy weight to bear, but one that gave me strength, grounding me in the certainty of what was to come. The family believed they had seen the last of me, that their contempt could be met with nothing but silence in return. But they were wrong. In the coming days, I would gather information and analyze every thread of their financial lives, looking for cracks in the foundation they so arrogantly leaned upon. I would examine bank statements, scrutinize expenditures, and weigh legal options. Every memory of sacrifice became a justification for action. Every slight, a call to restore balance. The quiet of the study settled around me like a cloak. The ticking clocks a steady reminder that time was on my side. I was no longer merely the man bruised by betrayal. I was the architect silently drafting the blueprint of a reckoning, one measured in numbers, in facts, and in the steady, unyielding tide of justice. They had no idea what was coming next. The days that followed passed quietly on the surface, but beneath that calm, my mind was a tempest of calculation and vigilance. Each morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose, the sting of humiliation transforming into an analytical drive sharpened by years of experience. I was no longer the father simply enduring the contempt of his daughter and son-in-law. I was the strategist moving unseen pieces on a chessboard they had yet to comprehend. One afternoon, the turning point revealed itself abruptly. While organizing some paperwork on the kitchen table, which Sarah had left carelessly scattered, I overheard a fragmented conversation that chilled me to my core. Sarah was speaking on the phone in hushed tones, the familiar cadence of impatience laced with unease. Her husband was with her, voice low but urgent, discussing an inheritance fund, something meant to be shared among family, yet evidently already manipulated without my knowledge. My heart quickened, not from shock, but from the ignition of something far graver than grief, a betrayal compounded by deception. They were conspiring in the shadows against me, scheming to liquidate or obscure assets that should have been transparent and justly accounted for. The sense of years of sacrifice and trust being corroded in secrecy fueled a simmering resolve. I sat perfectly still, listening. The details were faint but enough. Plans to cash out from a joint inheritance, exclusion of my input, and murmurs of leveraging funds through risky channels I knew all too well from my days in finance. The audacity took my breath away, the very fabric of family trust torn by greed and lies. But beneath the anger, a cold clarity surfaced. This was no longer about wounded pride. It was a problem to solve, a balance sheet to write. The same skills I had used to build wealth and advise others would now undo their deceit. I would not be drawn into reckless confrontation. Instead, I would assume the detached role I knew best, a master strategist, weighing risks, calculating consequences, crafting a meticulous response. That evening, I sat before my computer, sorting through years of tax returns, account statements, and mortgage documents I'd kept hidden away in a safe. Decades of financial data lay before me like a sacred manuscript that only I knew how to read. Sarah's expenditures loomed conspicuously. Charges at luxury stores, unexplained withdrawals, and the ever-increasing use of credit lines with reckless abandon. Her husband's portfolio reflected a similarly precarious pattern. Speculative investments, leveraged buyouts, debts negotiating the fine line between risk and ruin. Every number told a story, each inconsistency a thread to pull. I began mapping their financial moves, drawing connections, and identifying weak spots in their tangled web. These so-called investments were masks for desperation. Their fiscal arrogance hid impending collapse. I felt a grim satisfaction unraveling their facade, knowing that the foundations of their entitlement were far shakier than they presumed. But it wasn't just about exposing mismanagement or financial imprudence. It was about restoring order, protecting what was mine, and ensuring consequences for their betrayal. Leveraging my network, I reached out to an old lawyer friend, one I trusted implicitly from my days consulting on complex cases, someone seasoned in family disputes and corporate law. I laid out my concerns carefully, seeking counsel on how best to fortify my position legally without provoking unnecessary alarm. The advice was clear and encouraging. Document everything. Prepare for arbitration or legal scrutiny, but above all, maintain discretion. A public scandal would harm us all, but a strategic internal pressure could leverage compliance and correction without the chaos of courtroom battles. That was my path, quiet, powerful, inevitable. With legal guidance aligned, I extended my investigation. I contacted trusted former colleagues still working in banking institutions, subtly inquiring about anomalies in transaction records linked to their accounts. These professional favors were not gifts, but earned reputations that I could now call upon in my hour of need. I was rediscovering the strength of relationships built on mutual respect and integrity, a stark contrast to the deceit I now confronted. Meanwhile, Sarah and her husband continued their reckless spending, unaware that every move was under scrutiny. I noted the increasing anxiety in her eyes during family gatherings, the hurried phone calls, and the whispered discussions that stopped when I entered the room. Their facade of superiority began to crack, if only slightly, and it was enough. I made my presence known, but only subtly. Gentle reminders in conversation, calm, measured questions about financial decisions. They responded with irritation, thinly veiled disdain. Sarah's jaw tightened when I asked about the joint inheritance. Her husband's gaze darted away. The tension was palpable, yet I never let my voice waver or my demeanor slip. I was the calm center in their storm, deliberately unyielding. Each interaction was a battle, their frustration building as my quiet pressure continued. I saw the desperation creeping into their voices and movements. They didn't yet realize the scale of what lay beneath this surface, but that ignorance would be fleeting. With every phone call answered, with every ledger reviewed, I grew more confident. I was not merely reacting, I was shaping the coming reckoning, like a sculptor refining a form, removing excess and exposing raw truth. This was my domain now, the arena where logic overshadowed emotion. I would dismantle their false sense of security piece by calculated piece, not with anger, but through the slow, steady force of exposure and accountability. Their betrayal had lit a fire that I would extinguish only on my terms, precisely, completely, and without leaving room for their arrogance to flourish again. I was patient, but I was necessary, and I was ready. With the groundwork firmly laid, my investigation grew deeper and more intricate, revealing fissures beneath the surface that I hadn't fully anticipated. The ledger of deceit was longer than I'd imagined, populated by reckless gambles, inflated expenses, and veiled transfers cloaked in layers of fabricated complexity. The discovery shook me, not because of surprise, but because it confirmed the extent to which Sarah and her husband had spun their web of falsehoods, entwining family trust with calculated duplicity. It began with an unmarked envelope, arrived quietly in the mailbox one evening, containing detailed bank statements and business filings. The source was a trusted whistleblower from one of the financial institutions managing Sarah's husband's accounts, a discreet tip from someone who recognized my name and tradecraft. The dossier was comprehensive. Evidence of offshore accounts designed to squirrel away large sums, shell corporations operating as fronts to obscure cash flow, and loans approved under questionable circumstances. The more I examined, the clearer it became that their fiscal conduct was a blend of willful recklessness and deliberate fraud. This knowledge did not consume me with blind fury. Rather, it ignited a cold and focused determination, steely and unyielding. I was no longer merely the betrayed father nursing wounds of ingratitude. I was a strategist with a cause and the means to act. The landscape was laid bare, and now I had to navigate it with precision. Any misstep could cause collateral damage or allow their schemes to deepen. I needed a plan more intricate than any I'd executed in decades. I reached out again to my trusted legal confidant, a man whose expertise in family law and financial disputes was surpassed only by his discretion. With carefully chosen words, I presented the breadth of evidence and my concerns about ongoing misappropriation. He advocated for immediate action. Initiate freezes on the most suspect accounts, file for audits, and secure court-sanctioned oversight to prevent further dissipating of assets. The recommendations were clear. Act swiftly to safeguard what remained intact before the fallout could begin. I followed his guidance meticulously. Swift motions were filed, subtle yet firm orders to lock down funds connected to suspicious activities issued under legal seal. Though these steps were procedural, their psychological impact was devastating. Sarah and her husband were blindsided. They had been counting on continued access to the fortune. Suddenly, barriers materialized. At the same time, I engaged expert auditors and compliance officers, prosthetic extensions of my own expertise. Their task was methodical, to dissect every thread of financial data associated with the parties involved. These forensic probes uncovered a tapestry of irregularities, expenses padded beyond realistic limits, offshore conduits moving illicit money, negligent repayments masked by shifting dates, and loans acquired under false pretenses. I watched the image of their false security unravel, piece by piece. Yet I did not rush for a public exposé. The grandeur of a spectacle risked undoing years of family history, stirring divisions beyond repair. Instead, I employed subtler maneuvers, strategic disclosures to influential figures within their business and social circles, Carefully crafted hints dropped through reliable intermediaries. The ripple effect was immediate. Whispered doubts spread, contacts grew wary, and the foundations of their social capital began to crumble. Within the household, tension gnawed at the edges of their performance. At gatherings, I could discern glimpses of strain, a tightened smile here, a discomforted glance there. Sarah's poised confidence faltered intermittently, her manner guarded, anxious. Her husband's habitual bravado gave way to furtive motions and clipped responses. Their once unassailable facade was cracking. Though their unease was palpable, I maintained an unwavering demeanor. I made my presence known, but carefully. My questions were measured, my tone calm and unyielding, a steady counterpoint to their rising frustration. When I brought up sensitive topics, the joint inheritance, suspicious expenditures, the tightness of Sarah's jaw mirrored the narrowing of her eyes. Her husband's gaze flickered away, unwilling to meet mine. They sensed the narrowing noose, but were powerless to halt it. Each discussion was a contest. Their irritation and veiled hostility increased, mingled with the desperation that seeped into their voices. Yet I gave nothing away, not even a flicker of doubt. I was the eye of the storm, composed and deliberate, enforcing boundaries without raising my voice. This quiet assertion unnerved them more than confrontation ever could. Every transaction I reviewed, every phone call I intercepted, every ledger entry scrutinized fortified my confidence. I was no longer on the defensive. I was shaping the narrative and preparing the final unraveling. I pruned away falsehoods, exposing brittle truths with the precision of a master sculptor stripping marble to reveal form beneath roughness. The reckoning was taking shape, deliberate and unstoppable. This was the theater where logic ruled over passion, where relentless patience cut sharper than any impulse-driven act. Piece by piece, I was dismantling the illusion of their invulnerability, not with rage, but through the inexorable application of facts and accountability. The betrayal I had endured fueled a fire that burned quietly but fiercely within me. I would extinguish it on my terms, calmly, precisely, without leaving room for their arrogance to regroup or reinfest the foundations of my legacy. One night, unable to sleep, I pored over the latest reports of the forensic audit with my lawyer. The findings were damning. Debts unrecorded or disguised as common expenses. Sudden transfers that made no accounting sense. Inconsistencies in loan documents suggesting forgery or misrepresentation. The implications were grave, threatening both civil liability and criminal inquiry. Yet amidst the gravity, I found clarity. Every piece of wrongdoing was a key to unlocking justice. I was acutely conscious that my mission extended beyond mere financial restitution. The legacy I had built was interwoven with family history and pride. Public scandal had the power to shatter this fragile tapestry, setting siblings and grandchildren adrift in bitterness. My approach was to strike decisively yet carefully, ensuring accountability without fracturing the bonds still worth preserving. I opened quiet dialogues with trusted family elders and business associates, revealing carefully curated fragments of evidence, strong enough to persuade, subtle enough to avoid gossip. These conversations were delicate balancing acts, invoking duty and caution in equal measure. Isolation steadily closed in on Sarah and her husband. Allies abandoned them, fearful of association with a crumbling dynasty. Their inflated confidence deflated under the cold weight of doubt, mirrored in frantic meetings and hurried whispered calls, wrought with apprehension. I capitalized on every crack of vulnerability. Reputation damaged, access restricted, options narrowing, I pressed forward with methodical vigor. Court filings ensued, motions to safeguard remaining shared property, petitions for exhaustive audits, applications to freeze newly uncovered illicit transactions. Each success was a quiet victory, a signal flare illuminating the inevitable consequence of deceit. Throughout the campaign, I preserved my composure. my calm steadfast against the storms of their frustration and lashing retaliations. Their fury and sabotage attempts were predictably futile against the immutable tide of documented truth and legal authority. I readied myself for the inevitable reckoning, a confrontation where all betrayals would be laid bare: financial exploitation, mendacity, and the erosion of familial respect. This reckoning would be unassailable, a moment of reckoning not just for assets but for trust violated. They would learn, finally, that inheritance is not entitlement, that generosity has limits, and respect cannot be bought but must be earned and preserved. Now, as I sit with plans and evidence arrayed before me, I feel an undeniable calm mixed with unwavering resolve. The slow, strategic dismantling is nearly complete, and the final moves, exact, deliberate, and unyielding, await only the right moment. Justice is no longer merely an aspiration, but an approaching reality, poised to restore balance where arrogance tried to reign unchecked. The day I quietly put my plan into motion, a subtle yet profound shift rippled through the carefully constructed world Sarah and her husband inhabited. I was no longer the man who bore humiliation in silence. I had become the unseen architect of their unraveling, deploying precise moves that chipped away at the illusion of their security with relentless and calculated determination. The first step was deceptively straightforward yet devastatingly effective. I blocked access to several key bank accounts intricately tied to dubious transactions. I had ensured every legal detail was flawless, leaving no margin for error, no loopholes they could exploit. This move was silent, no declarations, no confrontations. Just the invisible constriction of their monetary lifelines. Payments halted, transfers bounced back, funds froze. The financial fluidity they had taken for granted suddenly seized up in a jarring halt. Their arrogance in treating my generosity as an endless well was met with a formidable barrier. Engaging my trusted network of old colleagues, legal advisors, and respected bankers was the next paramount step. These connections, built through decades of professional respect, opened doors to confidential information and influence. Discreet inquiries sparked audits on their enterprises and personal finances, weaving a tightening web of oversight. Their once unassailable fiscal playground now had watchful eyes watching every move. Simultaneously, I began to disseminate carefully calibrated pieces of information among stakeholders, investors, business partners, and mutual acquaintances, leaked with discretion yet enough weight to sow seeds of doubt. These quiet ripples grew swiftly, preserved the original language of trust as hesitant whispers spread through boardrooms and family rooms alike. The allies they counted on began reconsidering, casting furtive glances and quiet warnings. At family gatherings, I observed subtle tremors beneath the veneer of normalcy. Sarah's confident poise was strained. Her smile, though present, faltered beneath the weight of anxious eyes and restless hands. Her husband carried a rigid facade, but I caught moments of his mask slipping. Clenched jaws, hurried muted conversations, eyes avoiding mine. The aura of certainty they projected had begun to crumble beneath the pressure I applied. Despite the growing tension, I maintained a steady and composed presence. In conversation, my voice was calm, measured, my inquiries pointed but restrained. When I addressed the often evaded topic of the joint inheritance or specific expenditures that raised questions, Sarah's posture stiffened, a brief flare of defensiveness playing across her features. Her husband's gaze would dart away, evasive and resentful. The space between us was charged, words unsaid, pressing heavily. Each encounter was a calculated standoff, her irritation clashing with my unwavering resolve. Their frustration grew, marked by desperate whispers and curt responses, while I remained the steady eye of the storm, unyielding and deliberate. This quiet authority unnerved them far more deeply than any overt confrontation might have. I continued gathering intelligence relentlessly. Audit results returned with troubling revelations. Expenses inflated, debts disguised as routine charges, loans obtained under questionable circumstances, raising serious legal concerns. These findings fortified my confidence and fleshed out the architecture of my next moves. With methodical care, I charted their assets, debts, and hidden transactions, working closely with legal counsel to fortify what was truly mine. Every reckless maneuver they attempted to conceal became another strand I tightened, another bulwark constructed to protect my legacy from further erosion. This campaign required no violence, only the precision wielded through balance sheets, court filings, and patient persistence. The pressure I applied silently undermined their composure and destabilized their position faster than any outburst could. Their carefully maintained public veneer was cracking, and I watched the fractures deepen. The desperation of their predicament manifested in nervous planning sessions and increasing isolation. Allies once within their circle withdrew carefully, unwilling to be tainted by association with scandal. The parasitic arrogance that had shielded them now faded under the scrutiny my actions imposed. Throughout this prolonged process, I maintained composure, a steady beacon amid the storms of their frustration and attempts at sabotage. Their efforts to retaliate, innuendos, counter-accusations, subtle manipulations, were predictable and ultimately irrelevant against the immutable force of gathered evidence and legal authority. Alone, I reflected on the broader meaning of this struggle. It was far more than the reclamation of finances. It was about dignity, the right to be recognized, respected, and valued free from exploitation. Each step I took was a silent assertion that respect, unlike currency, cannot be coerced or purchased, but must be earned and preserved with integrity. Every minor victory, a frozen payment, a canceled transaction, a shifting alliance, tilted the scale further toward justice. Their overconfidence crumbled piece by piece, replaced by fear and unraveling certainty. The long arm of patience never slackened. Each move was deliberate, a slow crescendo toward the final reckoning. I was no longer reacting to their schemes, but directing the momentum of what was to come. This impending confrontation would expose every act of betrayal, financial impropriety, deception, and the deep wound of broken familial trust. It would stand beyond dispute, an unassailable testament to truth and accountability. They would learn, painfully and unequivocally, that inheritance is not a birthright but a responsibility, that generosity is a gift with boundaries, and respect and honor granted only through genuine reciprocity and honor. Sitting now surrounded by plans and irrefutable evidence, an undeniable calm washes over me, tempered by unwavering resolve. The dismantling of their false fortress stands on the brink of completion. The concluding sequences, precise, unrelenting, await the perfect moment for execution. Justice, no longer a distant ideal, but an approaching reality, ready to restore balance where arrogance once sought dominion unchecked. The day set for the family arbitration arrived with a weight heavier than any gathering I had attended before. The dismantling of their false fortress stands on the brink of completion. The concluding sequences, precise, unrelenting, await the perfect moment for execution. Justice, no longer a distant ideal, but an approaching reality, ready to restore balance where arrogance once sought dominion unchecked. The day set for the family arbitration arrived with a weight heavier than any gathering I had attended before. The office building was sleek and impersonal, all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the warmth that had once lived in our family home. Yet it was here, under the sterile fluorescence, that I would reclaim what had been recklessly squandered, that I would speak the truths long buried beneath lies and entitlement. As I entered the room, the faces of those assembled met me. Sarah and her husband, their expressions a mixture of defiance and apprehension. The wider family observing quietly, some hopeful, others resigned. Between us sat an air thick with unspoken tensions, lawyers on either side ready to wield words like weapons, and the arbitrator whose role was to serve justice and, in this moment, restore broken bonds through legal clarity. I settled into my seat with a calm born of years of preparation, my hands folded, my gaze steady. This was not a showdown fueled by anger, but a measured unveiling of truth. A methodical presentation rooted in every sleepless night spent gathering evidence, every sharp pang endured at their dismissiveness, every sacrifice that had gone unrecognized. I began by narrating the story not just of deception and mismanagement, but of deeper betrayal. I spoke of loans taken without disclosure, business accounts plundered under false pretenses, expenses inflated and hidden with malicious purpose. Each detail was laid out with precision, backed by forensic audits, bank statements, and legal documents. Yet I did not stop at the ledger. I painted a portrait of sacrifice, the countless evenings working overtime to pay Sarah's tuition, the myriad negotiations to secure our home, the vacations foregone so she might have opportunities I never dreamed of. These personal details gave weight to the numbers, numbers that were no longer abstract but symbols of broken trust. My patience was not weakness, it was hope that family would honor the bonds we create, I said. When those bonds are severed by greed and deceit, justice becomes not an option, but a necessity. The room was silent, heavy with the gravity of acknowledgement. Sarah's carefully maintained facade flickered. A glimpse of regret or calculation, I could not tell. Her husband's jaw tensed, the weight of evidence pressing on his defenses. The arbitrator leaned forward, eyes clear, probing. Questions echoed through the chamber like the ticking of a clock counting down to consequence. Lawyers scrutinized timelines, transactions, motive. I answered each with calm clarity, fortified by meticulous documentation and unwavering resolve. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was defensive yet tremulous. She attempted to excuse or minimize certain irregularities as miscommunications or unfortunate necessities of business. But her arguments faltered under the weight of factual exposure, each claim methodically deconstructed by seasoned legal minds. The truth had no refuge in her defenses. Her husband said less, his silence more telling than words could be. His clenched fists betrayed the storm beneath the surface. The armor of overconfidence was crumbling. Family members shifted uncomfortably, some questioning their loyalties, others silently praying for resolution. The air was thick with the complex emotions that arise when trust fractures so profoundly, a mixture of hope, betrayal, sorrow, and justice. As the session advanced, I remained a pillar of steadfast dignity. My restraint was my strength, my demeanor a silent testament to the years lost to betrayal and the future I had fought to reclaim. There was no triumphalism here, only the quiet assertion of a father wronged but resolute. The rulings, when delivered, were unambiguous. Misappropriated assets were ordered restored. Shared property was placed under protective custody. Legal responsibilities for debts and liabilities were assigned clearly. The privileges Sarah and her husband wielded with careless arrogance were stripped, replaced by accountability measures binding them to restitution and oversight. Walking away from that room, I felt a profound weight lift. No celebration, no gloating, but a deep, abiding peace. The years marked by pain and injustice had reached a resolution grounded in integrity. The dignity taken from me was restored in a manner befitting the sacrifices made silently over time. I understood fully the fragility of the familial bonds, a fabric that might never mend completely. Yet respect, earned through hardship and enforced by justice, was the foundation upon which the path forward would be built. I was no longer the figure disregarded or scorned. I was the guardian of our legacy, a man who endured the storm and emerged with patience, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. The reckoning had come, and justice was served, not in fury, but with quiet power and undeniable truth. The house had never seemed quieter. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of the heating system, even the framed photographs lining the walls, all reminded me that this was the home I had built, piece by piece, with unwavering dedication. Yet, the stillness this evening carried a weight far deeper than emptiness. It was a silence woven with the threads of finality and reflection. Sitting alone in the living room, I allowed my gaze to roam over those snapshots, moments of laughter and togetherness now tinged with a quiet melancholy. I was the man who had endured more than anyone should, yet emerged still standing, shaped by the steady resolve to protect what was mine. The years of betrayal, indignity, and strategic patience had led me here, to a place where dignity was reclaimed, not by loud victory, but through steadfast integrity. The arbitration was behind me now, its echoes swirling in my mind like the soft light fading outside my window. Justice had been handed down, not as revenge, but as measured redress. The assets misappropriated were ordered returned. Shared properties placed under accountable custodianship. The privileges Sarah and her husband once flaunted stripped away, replaced by responsibilities and oversight grounded in fairness. Yet I knew the wounds left behind were less tangible than those on paper. Family ties once frayed might never fully restore their original warmth. Some connections were severed irreparably by years of neglect, dishonesty, and disdain. It was a loss that no verdict could fully mend. I thought of Sarah, the daughter who had once clung to me with wide-eyed trust. Somewhere along the way, she had transformed, cloaked in entitlement and secrecy. This grief was the deepest scar, one no restitution could wholly heal. But even in this recognition, a part of me understood that accountability was the only path forward. Without it, respect would remain broken and our legacy tarnished. In the quiet of that room, I found an unexpected peace. I had fought with wisdom and patience, not fury. I had stood firm where others might have fallen silent or reacted with destruction. The home that sheltered us still stood. The values I cherished remained unbroken beneath the trials. As night cloaked the house, I pondered what truly gave life meaning beyond wealth or possessions. It was respect, earned, unforced, and preserved through humility and honor. The satisfaction that arises not from reclaiming fortune alone, but from acting with integrity, even when wronged. Our family would have to find a new shape in the days ahead. Some bridges burned in the fire of betrayal could never be rebuilt exactly as before. Yet, perhaps in time, with reflection and grace, what remained could take on a stronger, more honest form. Closing my eyes, I felt the weight of years lift, replaced by a calm resolve that was as quiet as it was profound. I had paid for this home, for Sarah's future, for every sacrifice endured, and every silent night spent protecting what mattered. Today, I reclaimed not only what was lost, but the very respect that had been denied. Because respect, I now understood, is never something purchased or demanded. It is something lived, something earned through patience and unwavering commitment. As I leaned back into the familiar embrace of my chair, the room settled around me like a comforting cloak. I was no longer a man defeated by betrayal, but one quietly strengthened by truth and dignity. And in that stillness, a solemn promise took root within me. I paid for the house, I paid for her future, and today I reclaimed both, because respect is never bought, it is earned.